Well, here's a little video I'm trying to put together with this article on veils. You know, as I say, it's interesting. We think of veils as such a traditional Catholic thing, but when you actually look back at the years of what's traditional for most of us, you see almost no evidence of veils being worn, except for maybe a very brief period in the early to mid 60s, maybe ending around 68, 69. I want to just take a look at some pictures from different periods. This first picture that you have in front of you is kind of an outlier. This is from 1750 in France. Of course, it's not a photo, it's a painting depicting that period. But nevertheless, you'll see in this, of course, the girls are making their first communion and a little older than today. And they have flowers and things in their hair. No evidence of veils, although today, certainly even today, the girls wear veils to make their first communion. But notice the women in the background wearing hats, or there's kind of a bonnet that one woman is wearing. But that seems to be depicting the tradition in France at that time. Of course, that's an outlier. We're going to go to more current times now. So here we are in 1922 in Chicago, and again, this is a series on the Mass that had been done, and the young lady is dressed, obviously wearing a rather large hat. They were kind of common flapper hats, almost from the 1920s. Very interesting style, to say the least. Now here we are in 1937. Now again, you'll see this is an ordination, but I want to say that you'll see the women who are kneeling there on the left in the lower part of the picture. Again, basically like pillbox hats on the right there, and then one woman looks like she's wearing a fedora, and I can't really see the person next to her. But again, just a little bit of a glimpse of the congregation that we see there. In the very front row on the left side, you'll also see women wearing rather elaborate hats as well. Again, no evidence of any veils being worn at this time. And here we are. This is my own parish, 1939, Washington, D.C., the dedication of Holy Comforter, St. Cyprian Parish. This is a detail from a much wider photo. They're all standing in front of the church. They come out right after Mass, and if we were able to pan around, you would see the bishop there, with Bishop Curley, and so on. That's the rectory in the background. All brand new. All those buildings are just brand new. But you see all the women again are wearing hats. I look and look, I can't see any evidence of a veil anywhere in sight. It was just the most, consistent thing that a woman would wear a hat in those days, and that's again 1939. Here we are. I'm somewhere in the Northeast. I don't know exactly this church. It's not a gorgeous church, though, and what a beautiful. It looks like they're doing the asperges for the Solemn High, or at least the Missa Cantata. And no, I see the deacon. So yeah, the subdeacon. So that would be a Solemn High. The asperges, probably an Easter Sunday morning, I'm going to guess, or if not Easter, some other important feast. And there you have it again. All the women. If you look carefully, I realize that these pictures are a little hard to see, but you'll see they're all wearing hats. And this is 1940. Now here we are in 1940, Aurora, Illinois. I try to go around the country a little bit with these pictures, so it's not just a regional thing. You see, it's a fairly consistently widespread thing. Now the veil inside, all the women, every one of them, almost to a number, I would say, are wearing hats. And beautiful hats at that. Now here we are in 1940 in New Jersey. I forget the name of the town, but anyway, this was a series of photos that was taken for Life magazine at that time. But anyway, again, you see the women there, in this case, older women wearing hats. Also, some women standing in the background of the photo. They're waiting for communion. And I'm going to guess this was, again, around Easter time, since so many are receiving communion, which was a little less common in those days. Now, here we are, African-American parish, St. Augustine. I think it's here in Washington, D.C., although it could be in another city. Almost has a look of the Deep South, so it could be down there, but I think it's D.C. Anyway, you'll see again, this is a common then among the African-American women. Now, by the way, even to this day, in my parish, a lot of the older African-American women still wear hats a little bit like these, rather broad-brimmed in many cases. But again, there is much more common still to this day for women in the African-American parishes to wear hats. They call them crowns. Now this from Indiana, and again, just a real quick look here, but you see again, it looks like it's beautifully decorated for Easter time, and here you have all the women sitting there, all of them wearing hats. So you see this is getting to be a little repetitious, isn't it? Here we are, 1915, Sacred Heart Parish in New Jersey. Could be like Tom's River or someplace like that in New Jersey. And again, all the women you can see, it's blurry in places there, but you can basically see that they're wearing hats. Now let's go overseas to Spain. This is a very hard picture to see. I realize that. I can enlarge it on my own computer, but you'll see if you look carefully that there actually are one or two veils, but most of the women are wearing hats. That's over, just so you get a sense that overseas in Spain. All right. Now this next one, we're coming back to the U.S. Here we are in the U.S. It's 1951 in Pittsburgh, and we once again see it's a wedding, and the couple was up there on the inside the sanctuary at the predella, it looks like, and the congregation, you see the women all wearing hats. This is just from a children's book in 1952, and you'll see that there's probably the godparents there holding the child. Back in those days, you got those kids baptized quick and early, and sometimes the parents, the mother couldn't be there; she was still convalescing. But anyway, there they are, and the woman, of course, is depicted as wearing a hat, which must have been standard in those times. Here we are in 1953 down in Richmond, Virginia. Once again, you'll see all the hats. Here's my own parish in 1954. This is the interior of our church, and 1954, and it was the 50th anniversary of the parish, and the bishop's there, off to the side, in what do they call this? A missa in Cormo Episcopo. So there we have the ladies all wearing their kind of like pillbox hats and so on. Now they do have some of them like little veil-like elements, but fundamentally they're still hats. And here you have my mother's wedding in 1959. Now this is not in the church, but you'll see that these women had just come right directly from the church and were with my mom and at the reception. But you'll see again the types of hats they wore. Now this next picture is from my parents' wedding as well. These are my grandparents. And they're quite literally standing outside the church. Now, of course, this is a wedding; it wouldn't be a standard mass. But this wasn't uncommon. I mean, both my mother. I remember when I was a kid, my mother and grandparents would have these sort of flowery hats where they could either put fresh flowers in, or they would have these cheapy plastic flowers. There wasn't a lot of silk flowers in those days. But anyway, the women would have these rather elaborate hats, and they were common to wear those all through the Sunday mass, not just the weddings. So here we are in 1968 in the Holy Name Cathedral in Chicago, and you will actually see, if you look carefully, a kind of a combination of women wearing a few veils and mostly hats. Now, this is, I think, a funeral for their bishop, and is it Cody? Very bad situation, I remember that. But this would have been the time it says that the inscription at the bottom is incorrect. That's not 1958. I don't know if you can see that Mass is turned toward, there's a new altar there, and it's facing toward the people. And so that's an error. But my one at the top there, 1968, that's the correct time. And again, if you were to be able to look very closely, you would see a few women with veils. Okay, so I think the period of time where veils became popular would have been right about 1961 or two. Jackie Kennedy kind of made them popular, and women started to wear them, both these little mantillas, and the bigger veils, or sometimes you see little things on the top of their head, kind of veil-like, not really so much hats. I think part of the reason was women wearing a lot of hats was going out of style at that time, and they still kind of had an instinct to cover their head in church. And so veils were an option that were more widely used. Now here we come to it. This is 1968 up in Boston. Now, this is a school mass, so you got to factor that in. But you'll see some of the girls wearing little hats, and other than you see on the left line there's a couple girls with their hands folded, one of them in a red blouse. She has one of those little like cap-like veils, It didn't really come down onto the shoulders. It just sort of covered the top of the head. There's another picture here from that same mess. This is 1968 here in Boston. See the girl here right in the foreground? She's got one of the little cap-like veils as well. Very, very common in those days. You know, one of the sad things was because you sometimes know something's going away when things get a little silly about it. But I do remember that my mother and sister would sometimes have just throw Kleenex up on top of their head like that. If for some reason they just forgot their veil, or we just were happy to stop by the church for a quick visit or something. You throw Kleenex up on the top of your hair. They would, and they put a little barrette up there and hold it in place. Kind of unusual. Here we are again. This is 1968 here, also in Boston. And again, notice the woman there wearing, on the right, wearing a sort of a pillbox hat, but on the left, she's wearing kind of a veil. And so again, that was that time where I think mostly veils became evident. Finally, then I think we're almost finally at this. I think it's the final photo. Yeah, this is a very right at the very end of an era, 1969. You'll see that this church, they'd already turned their altar, and they turned it around, and this looks like a graduation. People in the foreground are all wearing mortarboards. But if you look at the congregation, like for example, in the very middle of the thing, toward the on the right side of the church, but in the middle of our photo, there's a woman there wearing a rather large veil. You'll notice veils that are being worn, and you'll also notice hats. So again, these are where we start to see these veils that appeared for a very brief time in the 60s. And for some reason, I guess because it was at the end of an era, we really latched on and said, oh my gosh, all women used to wear veils. And it's just not true. It's just not really, and as I say, I love veils. In fact, I prefer them over hats. And I don't say this with any disrespect. But I think sometimes we who love the tradition, we have to sort of get our facts right. And things were not always as we imagined them in the quote old days in the church. It's just one of those situations where you want to just have more of an accurate memory. And so all of that's just the way things. There's my quick tour of the missing veil, so to speak. And the tale of the missing veil, although they were not unheard of, certainly in the 60s, they weren't as common as we think. And they were almost non-existent, really, until the 60s. So there's my brief excursion with you on that.